On a Wednesday morning in late October, when the first hard frost had already silvered the fields and the combines should have been rolling, Dale Pruitt stood at the edge of his equipment yard and watched his harvest die. Not all at once. That would have been too merciful. It died the way most expensive things die. Slowly, one failure compounding the next, each breakdown more expensive and more humiliating than the one before it. The John Deere S790 was the first to go. Hydraulic failure, his dealer said. A seal had let go somewhere deep in the machine's chest, and the repair parts were on back order out of Waterloo. 3 weeks minimum, maybe 4. Then the Case IH axial flow threw a rotor bearing on the second morning of cutting. Then the New Holland decided, apparently out of spite, that its cleaning system computer had seen enough of this world and wanted out. 3 combines, 3 breakdowns, 4,000 acres of corn standing in the field, the stalks beginning to dry and twist in the October wind, and a bank note that did not care about any of it. Dale Pruitt walked back to his truck, a new Ram 3500 diesel, loaded, the kind of truck that announces a man's net worth before he steps out of it, and sat behind the wheel and did not start the engine. He just sat there. He was 44 years old and had spent the better part of 20 years building Pruitt Ag into the largest custom harvesting operation in 3 counties. He had 6 combines, 4 grain carts, 2 semis, and a line of credit that looked impressive until a week like this one revealed exactly how fragile impressive could be. Let me tell you about Dale Pruitt. He was not a bad man. That is important to say before anything else. He was not cruel, not dishonest, not the kind of man who cheats his neighbors. But he was proud. Lord, was he proud. He had grown up the son of a tenant farmer in this same county, had watched his father borrow equipment and apologize for it, had decided early in his life that he would never be the man asking for the loan of a thing. He would be the man others came to. He would have the newest machines, the cleanest shop, the brightest paint on the equipment, the most horsepower in the county, and everyone would know it. He had succeeded at all of that. He had the machines, the shop, the paint, the horsepower. He had the Ram 3500 and the farm account at the steakhouse in town and the sponsorship sign on the Little League outfield fence. He wore his success the way some men wear a good coat, not to stay warm, but to be seen wearing it. And now 3 of his 6 combines were broken, the frost was coming harder, and the corn was waiting. He spent 2 days working the phones. He called Ag Pro, he called the regional Case dealer, he called 3 independent repair shops, he called a man in Kansas who was supposed to be something of a genius with combine electronics. The parts were back-ordered, the labor was booked solid, and the genius in Kansas wanted a number that made Dale set the phone down and breathe through his nose for 30 seconds before he could answer. The custom harvesting world had consolidated in the past decade. Everyone was running the same iron, sourcing from the same supply chains, and when those chains seized up, as they had in the past few years, everyone seized up with them. Complexity, Dale was learning, cuts both ways. The machines that could do anything could also fail at everything, and when they failed in ways that required proprietary software, specialized tools, and factory-trained technicians who were booked out for weeks. On the 4th day, his operation manager, a steady man named Kurt, who had been with him for 11 years, knocked on the office door and said what neither of them had been willing to say. "Dale, we might be looking at some contract penalties." Dale stared at the wall. There were framed photos there. Equipment photos, the way some men frame family portraits. The S790 on its first day of work, gleaming green in a September field. His first combine, a machine he'd bought used and paid off early. Him shaking hands with the John Deere regional rep at the dealer appreciation dinner. "I know it," Dale said. "What do you want to do?" Dale did not answer for a long time. Outside the window, the October sky was the color of a blue-gray stone, and the fields stretched away under it like something waiting. "I don't know yet," he finally said. "Let me think." But thinking was not producing answers. It was only producing more of the same knot that had been living behind his sternum for 4 days, tightening every time the phone rang. It was his wife, Carol, who mentioned the name first. She heard about it at the feed store in Millhaven, which is still, in certain rural communities, the place where news travels faster than any network connection. A woman named Doris, whose husband ran the elevator, told Carol that there had been a similar situation over in Garrett Township 2 years prior. A custom cutter who'd lost 2 machines in the same week and faced a harvest that wasn't going to wait. And that someone had come to help. An old man, someone who kept old machines in a barn, out past the Hendricks Road turnoff. "Virgil Marsh," Carol said at dinner. "That's the name Doris mentioned." Dale cut his pork chop. "Never heard of him." "Doris said he was something like 80 years old. Said he had old equipment, real old. She said it worked." Dale ate his bite of pork chop and did not say anything. "She said he helped the Weller operation in 22 when they lost their combine mid-harvest. She said he showed up with something out of a museum and finished the field." "Old equipment doesn't finish modern fields," Dale said. "There's too much volume. The yields are double what they were 30 years ago. You can't run old iron in corn like this." "I'm just telling you what Doris said." Dale set down his fork. The knot behind his sternum had not loosened. Outside, the wind was moving across the dark fields, and somewhere out there the corn was standing in the frost, and the banknote was not going to be moved by anyone's philosophy about what old equipment could or could not accomplish. "Fine," he said, "I'll go see him." Now let me tell you about Virgil Marsh. He was 81 years old in that October, and he had lived on the same 160 acres his entire life, which is a kind of rootedness that is becoming rare in this country and ought to be considered as a form of knowledge. He had been born in the farmhouse still standing at the end of the lane, had learned to drive a tractor before he learned to drive a car, had spent his working life farming those 160 acres with a patience and a consistency that struck some of the younger farmers in the county as quaint and struck others as simply old. He had not expanded, he had not consolidated, he had not taken on investors or precision ag subscriptions or GPS auto steer systems. He farmed his land, he maintained his equipment, and he watched. That was the word most people used about Virgil. Again, they said he watched. He had a quality of sustained attention that you do not see often in a man or a woman, a quality that suggested he was always in the process of learning something from whatever was in front of him, whether it was a field, a machine, or another person. He had been a watcher his whole life, and what he had watched over 81 years was the land and the machines that worked it, and the ways that both could surprise you if you paid close enough attention. His barn was not remarkable from the outside. Grey boards, a roof that had been reshingled twice since the original construction, a chicken wire fence around the kitchen garden that Carol Pruitt would later describe, charitably, as enthusiastic. But inside that barn, Virgil Marsh kept things that the county extension agent had once described, in a different kind of charity, as an agricultural time capsule. Dale drove out on a Thursday morning down Hendricks Road past the old Holcomb place, past the stand of oaks that marked the township line, and turned in at a mailbox that read Marsh in letters that had been hand-painted sometime in a previous decade. The lane was gravel and ran straight between 2 fields to the grey barn and the white farmhouse. He parked, stepped out of the Ram 3500 and looked around. An old man came out of the barn wearing canvas work pants and a canvas shirt, neither of which had been selected for their appearance, both of which showed the honest darkening of long use. He was not large, he was of medium height, slightly bent at the shoulder, with hands that even from 20 feet away looked like they had been made by a different industrial process than the rest of him. Large, heavy, deliberate hands that hung at his sides with a kind of settled weight. "Mr. Pruitt," the old man said. "Mr. Marsh." Dale extended his hand and Virgil took it with those large hands. His grip was not demonstrative. It was simply there. "Heard you had some trouble." "3 combines down," Dale said. "Parts are back-ordered. I've got corn standing." Virgil nodded slowly, the way a man nods when he is filing information, rather than performing sympathy. "How many acres?" "Still got maybe 2,800 that needs to come off." "What kind of yields you running?" 220 to 240 bushel corn. Good corn. Maybe the best I've had in 5 years. Virgil looked at him steadily for a moment. Then he said, "Come inside. Let me tell you about what was inside that barn." Along the south wall, behind a workbench so neatly organized it looked like a surgery, there were 2 International Harvester Farmall tractors from the 1950s, both painted and maintained to a standard that could only be described as reverential. On the north wall, hung on wooden pegs, were chains and cables and hitches organized by size and application, each one oiled, each one without a spot of significant rust. In the center of the barn, on a swept concrete floor, and it was that detail, the swept concrete, that would stay with Dale for the rest of his life, the image of an old man sweeping the floor of a barn in a county where most barns had dirt floors and most men would not have thought to sweep them. In the center of that swept floor sat a combine, or rather, the ghost of a combine, or the ancestor of one. It was a Minneapolis Moline self-propelled combine, a Model 69, built in the mid-1950s, and it sat in that barn the way certain very old things sit, with a complete and settled confidence in its own existence that had nothing to do with the opinions of the people looking at it. It was painted in the original prairie gold, retouched over the years but faithful to the original. The steel reel above the header caught the light from the high barn windows and held it. The cylinder housing, the grain tank, the engine compartment, all of it clean, whole, all of it clearly the object of sustained and serious attention. Dale Pruitt looked at it. He was, he would admit later, trying to find a polite way to leave. "That's your combining equipment," he said. "That's my combining equipment," Virgil said. Dale looked at it again. He was a man who understood machinery, who could give you the specifications of every major combine platform on the market, who subscribed to 2 trade publications and attended the farm shows. He understood what he was looking at. He understood that the machine in front of him had a cylinder speed and a grain tank capacity and a power output that belonged to a world before hybrid corn, before modern yield expectations, before the sheer density of what those 2,800 acres were going to require. He understood, in short, that what he was looking at could not possibly help him. And so he said with a smile that he thought was polite, but that was actually the smile of a man at a funeral for someone else's relative, "Mr. Marsh, I appreciate you seeing me, I do, but I'm looking at 240 bushel corn in 2,800 acres. Oh, that machine, how old is that machine?" 1956, Virgil said. "It's a 1956. My modern machines struggle with these yields. That thing, and I'm not trying to be disrespectful, sir, because it's a beautiful machine, it really is. That thing was built for maybe 120 bushel corn, maybe 140 if you pushed it. I'm running nearly double that. It would choke. The cylinder would trash." Virgil looked at the machine. He did not look at Dale. He looked at the machine with the expression of a man hearing someone describe a friend and getting the description mildly wrong.
"You know about that machine?" Dale said, pressing. "About the design specifications?" "I know everything about that machine," Virgil said quietly. He turned back to Dale. "My father bought it new in '56. I have run it every harvest season from 1963 to the present day. I have replaced 2 drive belts, 1 cylinder rasp bar set, and the original canvas elevator with a chain and paddle in 1978. The engine, the bearings, the cylinder, the sieves, they are all original or original specification replacements. That machine has harvested this farm's crop for 62 consecutive years." Dale was quiet for a moment. "With respect," he said, 62 years ago the yields were different." "Yes," Virgil said. "They were, but corn is still corn. It has a kernel. The kernel has to be separated from the cob. The cob has to be moved from the crop. The speed at which you move determines how much you break and how much you lose."
"That machine," and here he nodded toward the Minneapolis Moline without looking at it, "runs its cylinder at a speed that was determined by the properties of corn, not by the ambitions of a marketing department. It runs slow enough to thresh clean and fast enough to keep moving. It does not know how to rush, and that is not a limitation. That is a design philosophy." Dale stared at him. The barn was quiet around them. Somewhere outside a crow called once and did not call again. Now let me pause here and ask you something. Have you ever been in the presence of a person who was simply not impressed by you, not hostile, not contemptuous, simply genuinely unimpressed the way a good tool is unimpressed by the hand holding it, not because it has an opinion, but because it exists in relation to work, and work does not care about your truck or your line of credit or the number of combines you own when they're running? Have you felt what it is to be in a room with someone who is measuring you against a standard that has nothing to do with your net worth? Dale Pruitt felt it that morning in that barn, and he did not like it, and he did not trust it, and he left without making any agreement, telling Virgil he would be in touch, which was his polite way of saying he had no intention of calling. He spent 2 more days on the phone. He called 4 more dealers. He called a man in Nebraska who rented combines. The rental machines were committed through the 3rd week of November, and the rates had climbed to numbers that rewrote his spreadsheet in a way that kept him up at 2 in the morning, reading the cells and rereading them. He called his equipment insurance, he called his farm lender, he called Kurt, and told him to do the math on the contract penalty scenarios. On the 6th day after the first breakdown, with frost deepening every night, and the forecast showing a hard freeze by the 2nd week of November, Dale called Virgil Marsh. "I'll give you a shot," he told the old man. "1 field, the southwest field off County Road J, 240 acres. If you can make a dent in it, we can talk about the rest." "All right," Virgil said. "What do you charge?" There was a pause. "Nothing," Virgil said. "If the machine does the job, you can make a donation to the Garrett Township Agricultural Heritage Museum, whatever you think is fair."
"If it doesn't do the job, you owe me nothing but honesty about why it failed." Dale was quiet for a moment. That's not a normal arrangement." "No," Virgil said, "it's not." Virgil arrived at the southwest field on Saturday morning. Dale was there with Kurt and 2 hired men, and when the lowboy trailer came down County Road J with the Minneapolis Moline lashed to its deck, one of the hired men, a young man named Tyler, who was 22 and had grown up on his parents' operation, looked at the machine on the trailer and said something to the other hired man that made both of them laugh. Dale did not join in the laughter, but he did not stop it. Virgil did not appear to hear it. He walked to the field edge and stood there for a long time, looking at the corn. He walked into the corn a few rows and came back out. He knelt down and looked at the base of the stalks, at the angle of the ears, at the way the rows were running relative to the morning light. He stood up and looked at the sky for a moment, the particular unself-conscious consultation of a man who has read weather his entire life. And then he walked back to the trailer and began the process of unloading the machine. Let me tell you about that machine's history in full. The Minneapolis Moline Model 69 was purchased new in the spring of 1956 by Howard Marsh, Virgil's father, for $4,200. This was, in 1956, a significant sum, the rough equivalent of what a very good dairy cow would cost today, except that Howard Marsh paid it in cash, having saved for 3 years. He ordered it from the implement dealer in Millhaven, who had to special order it from the factory in Hopkins, Minnesota, and who told Howard when it arrived that it was one of the finest combines he had seen, which Howard took as information rather than as flattery. Howard Marsh ran that combine from the harvest of 1956 until the harvest of 1962, when he suffered a stroke in the wheat field in August and did not recover sufficiently to operate heavy machinery. His son Virgil, 19 years old and 2 years out of high school, took over the operation of the combine and the farm in the fall of 1963. He was one of the youngest men in the township to be running his own harvest, and he ran it with a seriousness of purpose that the older farmers recognized as the real thing. Over the following decades, when most operations in the county upgraded first to larger self-propelled machines, then to cab-equipped machines, then to computer-controlled machines, Virgil kept the Model 69. Not out of sentiment exactly, though sentiment was not absent from his decision, but out of a practical conviction that the machine worked, that he understood it completely, that it had never failed him in a harvest, and that the understanding between a man and his machine, built over decades, was worth more than the understanding between a man and something new. When synthetic precision agriculture began arriving in the county in the early 2000s, Virgil watched it with interest and without hostility. He attended the meetings, he read the literature, he asked questions that the presenters found unexpectedly penetrating, and then he went home and harvested his 160 acres with the Minneapolis Moline, and the crop came in clean, and the grain was good, and the machine sat in the swept barn through the winter, maintained and ready. It was the year 2007 when a neighbor's grandson, home from college and studying agricultural business, told Virgil at the elevator that the old combine was theoretically incapable of handling modern corn yields. Virgil had listened to him carefully and said, "Let's go look at the field." And they had gone to look at the field, and the field was clean, the grain was in the tank, and the losses on the ground were measured by Virgil at less than 1%. The grandson had not known what to say to that. Virgil had not said anything further. The field had said what needed saying. The machine came off the trailer on Saturday morning in October, with Virgil at the controls, moving it with a precision that suggested not expertise in the usual sense, but something more integrated, the precision of a man who is not operating a machine so much as continuing a conversation with it that has been ongoing for more than half a century. Dale watched this and did not laugh. He still did not believe it would work, but he had stopped laughing. Virgil spent 40 minutes at the field edge before he made his first cut. He adjusted the header height twice. He checked the cylinder clearance with a gauge from his shirt pocket. An actual physical gauge, the kind that predated digital readouts by several decades, and made a small adjustment with a wrench he kept on the platform. He checked the sieve settings by opening an access panel and looking at them, then closing the panel. He checked his ground drive engagement. He checked his unloading auger. Tyler, the 22-year-old, made a comment to Kurt about whether the old man was going to harvest the field or just look at it, and Kurt said, in a tone that surprised Tyler by its quietness, "Watch." Then Virgil drove into the corn. Let me tell you about the next several hours.
The Minneapolis Moline did not move fast. This is the first thing that was apparent, and it was the thing that Dale's impatience seized on as evidence of inadequacy. His own machines moved through corn at 4 to 5 miles per hour in normal conditions. Virgil was moving at perhaps 2.5. But something else was apparent within the first 100 yards to anyone watching carefully. The corn was going in and it was not coming back out. On his own machines, especially at high yield, Dale had learned to watch the residue patterns behind the machine, the way the stover fell, the way the grain loss indicators read. Because the sheer volume of material moving through the machine at speed could overwhelm the cleaning system and push unthreshed grain out with the residue. He had adjusted his loss monitors. He had calibrated his concave clearances. He had subscribed to a precision ag service that gave him continuous feedback on his loss rates. And still in heavy corn, he lost grain. Behind the Minneapolis Moline, the stover fell clean. The straw walked across the sieves at the pace Virgil had set, which was the pace the machine had been designed for, which was the pace that allowed the cleaning shoe to do what it was designed to do, separate grain from material with something approaching completeness. The cylinder threshed without overloading. The concaves let the grain through without cracking kernels because the cylinder was not moving faster than the corn could be handled. It was slow, it was methodical, it was, in the vocabulary of modern production agriculture, almost comically deliberate. And it was working. Kurt was the first to say something. He had been standing at the field edge, watching with Dale and Tyler for about 20 minutes when he walked over to Dale and said quietly, "He's got good separation back there." Dale said nothing. An hour in, Tyler walked out to the rows behind where Virgil had made his cuts and came back with his palm out. On his palm were the grain losses from a square meter of ground behind the machine. "That's less than I see behind ours," he said. He sounded genuinely confused. Dale looked at the kernels in Tyler's palm. He was quiet for a long time. By noon, Virgil had harvested 60 acres. This was not fast. His own machines would have been over 100 by now. But it was 60 clean acres with the corn in the tank and off the ground, and the grain that Virgil unloaded into the waiting cart was undamaged, the test weight right, the moisture where it should be, the quality good. By 4 in the afternoon, the southwest field was done. Not most of it, not the majority of it. Done. 240 acres, clean, the corn in the tanks, the field behind the machine, looking like the kind of harvested field that farmers of an earlier generation had aimed for as a matter of professional pride. Virgil shut the machine down at the field edge, climbed down from the platform with the careful movement of a man who is 81 and knows it, and walked over to where Dale and Kurt and Tyler were standing. Dale was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Can you do the east fields?" Virgil said, "Yes." Over the next 8 days, Virgil Marsh harvested 1,900 acres of Dale Pruitt's corn in the Minneapolis Moline Model 69. He did not harvest all of the remaining acreage. His machine, at its appropriate pace, was not built for the full scale of Dale's operation. But he harvested the critical fields, the ones where the contract obligations were tightest and the frost risk was highest, and he harvested them cleanly and without a single mechanical failure, and the grain came out of those fields at a quality that Dale's grain buyer noted specifically when the trucks arrived at the elevator. On the 9th day, with the critical harvest completed and his own machines back from the dealer, Dale Pruitt drove down Hendricks Road and turned in at the mailbox with the hand-painted letters and parked the Ram 3500 in front of the grey barn. Virgil came out and they stood in the thin November light between the truck and the barn. "I want to apologize," Dale said, "for the way I talked about your machine the first time I came out here, and for the way my men talked." Virgil looked at him steadily. "I want to understand something," Dale said. "I've got machines that cost $400,000 each. That one cost your father $4,000 in '56. And it did what my machines couldn't do. I need to understand how that's possible." Virgil was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Come inside." They stood in the barn beside the Minneapolis Moline, which was clean again. Virgil had washed and greased it within 24 hours of finishing. And Virgil said, "What does your machine try to do?" Dale thought about it. "Process as much corn as possible in as short a time as possible." "Yes," Virgil said, "and that is a reasonable goal. Speed and volume are real. Time is real. Contracts are real. I understand all of that." He put his hand on the cylinder housing of the Minneapolis Moline. But this machine was designed around a different question. The question was, what does the corn need? Not what can the machine do? What does the corn need to be separated from itself correctly, with the least damage and the least loss? The engineers who built this had one question. What is the correct speed for corn? And they built backward from the answer. The speed is in the metal itself. You cannot change it without rebuilding the machine. Dale looked at the machine. It can't be sped up. It can be sped up, Virgil said. I could drive faster. I could increase cylinder speed. I could push it. The machine would comply for a while, and the grain losses would climb, and the kernel damage would climb, and the machine would begin to show it in the bearings and the drive systems. My father told me when I was young, this machine does not want to be hurried, not because it is old, because it was built right. A machine built right resists the impatience of the operator. That resistance is not a flaw. That is the machine telling you the correct speed for the work. Dale was quiet for a long time. Outside the barn, the November wind moved across the fields, and the harvested ground was the color of pale straw, and the sky was that hard blue that comes in autumn when the humidity has left the air. "I owe you a donation to the museum," Dale said. "Whatever you think is fair," Virgil said. Dale wrote a check to the Garrett Township Agricultural Heritage Museum for $25,000. He handed it to Virgil. Virgil looked at it and said nothing, but he put it carefully in the chest pocket of his canvas shirt. Let me tell you about the years that followed. Dale Pruitt became a different kind of operator, not a slower operator. He was still in the custom harvesting business, still running large modern iron, still chasing efficiency, but he began to think differently about the machines he ran, asking not only what they could do at maximum throughput, but what the crop needed. What speed, what treatment, what gentleness. And he found that the question reoriented him in ways that showed up in his grain quality, in his contracts, in his professional relationships. He became, in the vocabulary of the agricultural world, a better harvester. He kept a photograph in his office, not an equipment photo this time, but a photo of the Minneapolis Moline taken from the field edge on that Saturday morning, the gold machine moving through the gold corn under a grey October sky. His children asked about it sometimes. He told them the story. He told it the way he had heard it, which is to say, slowly and with attention to what mattered. Virgil Marsh continued to farm his 160 acres. He was called twice more in the following years to help with harvest emergencies in the county, and both times he came with the Model 69, and both times the work got done. He was not a legend in the way that legends are built of exaggeration. He was a legend in the way that real things become legendary, because the thing was real, and it kept being real. And over time, the realness accumulated into something that people told stories about. He died in February, 7 years after the October harvest, at 88 years old, in the farmhouse where he had been born. His son Robert, who had come back to the farm from an engineering career in Cincinnati 8 years earlier, was with him. The funeral was at the Methodist Church in Millhaven, and it was, as these things are in small agricultural communities, a crowded event. Dale Pruitt was there, in the second pew, and he stood for the hymns with the specific quality of attention he had learned from Virgil, which is to say, fully, without reservation, without an eye on what came next. Robert Marsh kept the Minneapolis Moline in the swept barn. He kept the concrete swept. He maintained the machine through the winters, as his father had, with the original specification parts and the patience of a man who had been taught to understand that some things are worth the time they require. And 3 years after Virgil's funeral, in an October not unlike the one we began in, Robert's phone rang. Let me tell you who was calling. It was a young man named Marcus Pruitt, Dale's son. 26 years old, just 2 years into running his own custom harvesting venture. Smaller than his father's, building toward something, and facing, in the 3rd week of October, the precise situation his father had faced. Broken iron, standing corn, a deadline that was not going to move. He had heard the story his whole life. He had looked at the photograph in his father's office. He had known the name Virgil Marsh the way you know the names of people who mattered to someone you love, as a weight of reference in the air of a house. But he had also grown up with the machines, with the screens and the GPS overlays and the yield monitors, and some part of him had thought, as young people will think, not from cruelty but from the honest confidence of having grown up in a time of greater things, that the story was history, that the situation had been specific, that the technology had advanced beyond the conditions that had made such a rescue possible. He thought this right up until the moment when his phone showed him the extended forecast and the repair timeline and the contract terms, and the thinking stopped and the calling started. Robert Marsh answered on the 3rd ring. Mr. Marsh, Marcus said, my name is Marcus Pruitt. I think my father knew your father. There was a pause. Then Robert said, I know who your father is. I know the story. Another pause. You have corn standing. Yes, sir. And you need the combine. Marcus hesitated for just a moment. The young man's hesitation, the check of pride before the submission to necessity. Yes, sir, he said, I do. Robert Marsh was quiet on the line for a moment, and in that moment, if you knew how to listen, you could hear something that was not quite the sound of the present. The low, steady thrum of a machine that had been built to move at the speed of corn, and had been moving at that speed for the better part of 70 years, and was ready to move at it again. I'll bring it, Robert said. Some things don't become obsolete. They just wait for people to remember why they were built.